Well, we're all thinking about November 5th, the third presidential election with Trump on the ballot, and the second one in which John Oliver is eligible to vote. That's right, John Oliver has voted in as many presidential elections as this guy. I'm sure they're both looking forward to it, almost as much as they're looking forward to their first shave. And with the pressure mounting, Oliver decided to do an episode on election subversion. John Oliver's show, like all propaganda, is there to reinforce the regime definition of common sense, to reset everyone into what's seen as political neutral, and ultimately to get people to do something like vote. But it's not just about voting. With this segment, Oliver is also trying to get people to act in a certain way after the election. I'll be looking at his arguments, but keep this question in mind. What does he want people to do? Oliver starts off with his predictions.
If Trump loses, he will not concede gracefully. He's already said he will only accept the results if it's a fair and legal and good election. And he's been laying the groundwork to cry foul if he loses.
So if Trump loses, he will not concede gracefully, which is fair. I'm not sure Trump has ever done anything gracefully. The Democrats, on the other hand, are the most graceful people on the planet. They're like a swan crossed with a flamingo, crossed with Kristi Yamaguchi. They would never do something so crude as question the results of an election. But Trump calls everything they do election interference.
Trump and his campaign have co-opted the phrase election interference to refer to pretty much anything from the multiple indictments against him to the Fed's recent decision to cut interest rates, with Trump at one point even posting election interference, never surrender, with his own mugshot.
Come on, don't pretend that mugshot wasn't one of the coolest things you've ever seen. Though to be fair, John Oliver looks like the kind of guy whose idea of cool is a well-organized filing cabinet. Well guys, I went all James Dean and ordered the color-coded file tabs. Oliver laments how far we've fallen since the 70s, when right-wing politicians would just go away when they were told.
When the Watergate tapes came out, Nixon had to resign in disgrace. If that happened today, he'd probably be able to release them all as an audiobook and win a Grammy.
Yes, and when we win, Nixon will get his posthumous Grammy. Heck, we'll give him the full EGOT and make John Oliver present it. But then we get to the real crux of his argument, that the 2020 election was perfect.
And all this happened despite a joint statement from federal election infrastructure officials calling it the most secure election in American history.
You have arguments and evidence? Well, that's too bad, because I have a letter from a bunch of Smarties, just like the 51 intelligence officials who said that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. It's crazy how many of the left's arguments reduce to the experts say shut up. But even with all the expert opinions, people still won't go along.
More than a third of Americans still do not accept Biden's victory as legitimate.
Wow, 1 in 3 Americans. Also remember that 1 in 3 Biden supporters think the Trump shooting might have been staged. The government responded to this by fining Alex Jones another $1 billion. But the real crazy people are the ones who think that illegals are voting.
Skipping the fact that this theory is caked in racism, how does it even make sense? You really think people would flee their homes, travel under dangerous conditions to enter this country just to vote?
Of course, nobody's saying they came here just to vote. They've got other stuff to do.
They're eating the dogs.
But the fact is that the regime has been giving illegals preloaded debit cards, flying them into swing states, and suing to prevent non-citizens from being removed from voter rolls. But if you think any of that's weird, you're just
caked in racism.
But there are things that Oliver is worried about.
Groups like Mitchell's are now working with computer programs like these that automate the process of finding voters to challenge. For instance, this one trawls through everything from public voter registration data to business records to change of address databases to obituaries to find people to challenge because they may have died, moved, or be otherwise ineligible. Users can then make potentially thousands of challenges to voter eligibility with just a few clicks.
And he's upset that 70 MAGA people, or as he calls them,
pro-Trump election conspiracies,
are working as county election officials in swing states. 70 people across 6 states. And I'm sure that thousands of other election officials couldn't care less who's president. Oliver is also worried that poll workers are having to count paper ballots because,
as experts have explained, that has the potential to cause chaos.
Asking people to count pieces of paper will cause chaos, which of course is the opposite of cool. Notice how he justifies that idea.
As experts have explained,
the same way that he justifies the idea that 2020 was the most secure election in history, thus allowing him to downplay all of these concerns. But it might be helpful to look at how John Oliver reacts when his side loses. Spoiler, it's different. When they launched the investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 election, John Oliver didn't want to minimize those concerns.
It felt like there simply could not be a bigger story than that. And that was a huge deal, which is also a massive development, and that is also potentially enormous because it feels like a pretty big deal. You would almost have to be trying really hard not to see this as a big deal.
And that was just in his first full segment about it. His second one was about why the attempts to shut down the Mueller investigation were all driven by dubious motives, but that any reasonable person would want a full, thorough investigation.
The question, did a hostile foreign government try to manipulate our election, is something any reasonable person should want answered quickly. And yet, an increasing number of Americans seem to want the investigation to stop.
He did a segment making the case for impeachment. He talked about the P-tape. He did a whole segment on Putin.
Russia, the country that gave the world Tetris, Merkins you wear on your heads, and potentially the 45th President of the United States.
And a segment on the Mueller report once it came out. Questioning the results of an election was his full-time job for 2 years, and he's mad that a few MAGA grandmas are emailing their local precincts too much. I'm not going through these points to prove to you that he's inconsistent. Of course he is. He's doing the legwork for the regime, and when a regime is inconsistent, they don't get arrested by the logic police and removed from office. But yesterday you said that we weren't at war with East Asia. Ha, got ya! They expect their audience to forget everything they've said in the past, which is a safe bet when some of their audience doesn't have object permanence yet. I'm pointing these things out so that you know that you're not crazy, and so that you can see what Oliver is doing. So back to the original question. What is John Oliver trying to get his audience to do? Of course he's trying to get them to vote for Harris. He only mentions Harris by name one time toward the end of the half-hour-long video, and Trump 22 times, along with tons of clips. Which is smart. Doing a segment about how great Kamala Harris is would be too tough even for him. Every prostitute has a line. It's clear how he wants people to vote and why. It's about stopping Trump. But his final word is this: if it's not an obvious landslide on election night, this will drag on. And there, he's right. But Oliver's segment is designed to make people think that if it drags on, that it's Trump's fault alone. That if Trump questions the results, he'll be blowing things way out of proportion. That Trump will be picking a fight for no reason. And whatever the regime has to do to stop him will be justified. And don't forget, cool.